With Phase 4 nearing its end, this next year might bring us more and more hints about who will be expected in this new Phase 5 rollout. But in the meantime, it's fun to speculate. So, here are the top 10 weirdest superheroes we want in the MCU. At number 10, we have Hindsight Lad. Okay, there are going to be some joke characters on here, but I'm not messing around when I say that some of these extra weird ones would actually do well in the MCU, at least for a moment. For example, Hindsight Lad. Although he's very silly and probably not meant to be more than a gag character in the comics, I think would be a very funny throwaway joke for the bigger Marvel fans. In the comics, Hindsight Lad is actually just computer programmer Carlton LaFroige, who tries to pass off the ability of learning from the past as a superpower to make it onto the new Warriors team. What's even dumber than the name is that he actually makes it onto the team and quickly becomes the least liked member. But I don't see the MCU taking the joke that far, but I could see a non-superpowered supporting character taking on the goofy mantle for a one-off joke. At number 9, we have DOOP. As silly as this character seems, he's not much more bizarre than Rocket Raccoon, and that character has proven to have made a seamless transition into the MCU since his debut in 2014. Okay, DOOP is a little sillier. He's an alien creature who looks like a green bean with arms and a face, but he has a huge range of powers and an actually pretty impressive strength level, giving him enough to hold up in a battle with Thor. He can shoot psionic energy and also use, get this, bass guitar to channel the power of the funk. He also uses a gun called the Ultimate Nullifier, which shoots bees, chainsaws, and bowling balls out of it. He's probably the weirdest character on this list in all respects, but maybe he would be a fun cameo in a battle set in space in an upcoming movie, or maybe just somewhere in the background for a second. Once again, I really think this character should only exist as a fun moment and not by any means be featured in any front-running role. I don't want to watch the MCU destroy their legacy any more than the next guy. At number 8, we have Phone Ranger. Okay, it's getting hard to keep up this charade that I actually want these characters woven into the MCU in any major way. I think it's fair to say that any of these heroes so far would be funny to see briefly just for the meme of it, but I don't want to pretend I'd actually want a Phone Ranger series or even a scene with him any longer than 2 minutes. Because this hero is literally a phone repairman with a mini spaceship. After an average phone repairman named A.G. Bell discovers a tiny ship trapped in one of the phones he's repairing, he gains access to every communication system in the world. This isn't the most compelling power set or origin story, but I don't know, maybe we could even just see an homage to this weird superhero when Ant-Man flies a tiny ship out of a telephone speaker or something, I don't know. At number 7, we have Grasshopper. This guy is known as a bit of a loser in the comics, having been killed off a handful of times in pretty embarrassing ways. But despite this, and despite the fact that he's based on a much less cool insect than Spider-Man, I think he has some potential. Even if he's kept as a sort of B character, I think he could fit into the MCU in some weird way. I think his costume isn't badly designed, and well, that's kind of it. I think he could do for a modernization upgrade, but maybe one of the Marvel heroes' out of touch parents could take on the mantle for a bit, or an annoying older brother or something like that. He only joins the Great Lakes Avengers in the comics, so maybe in the future an MCU version of the Young Avengers could come across the GLA and we can catch a glimpse of Grasshopper. At number 6, we have Glob Herman. With hints at mutants appearing in Phase 5 of the MCU, we may be able to see some X-Men in the MCU pretty soon. Now, I don't think they'll be rushing to get Glob Herman on the big screen before Wolverine or Magneto, let's say, but there's a chance that if they really dive into the X-Men storylines and characters, we can expect to see a whole slew of new characters, and maybe Glob Herman will make a cameo. Glob has a thick layer of wax instead of skin, which is transparent and allows you to see his skeleton and organs moving around in there. But he isn't entirely useless and is actually known to be relatively important as a character in the comics. He can light himself on fire and fling hot flaming wax at his enemies, which isn't an awful power set, but it's also pretty bad. At number 5 is Doorman. Okay, this is another one like Grasshopper that I genuinely think could have a chance at making an appearance in the MCU. Aside from his god-awful name and reputation as a pretty ridiculous hero, I think his power set and aesthetic are pretty dang cool. And no, he isn't super good at holding the door for people. He's actually got the ability to create portals as well as making himself totally intangible. And that pairing of powers actually matches up to being a pretty powerful combination. And tied in with his cool black and white color scheme, I honestly honestly think that this guy can make an appearance in the MCU outside of a meme-like context. In the comics, he sacrifices himself to take down Maelstrom, but is revived as the Angel of Death, at which point he gets a major power boost. So perhaps this iteration as the Angel of Death could make an appearance, hinting at the backstory of having been Doorman in a previous life. At number 4 is Squirrel Girl. Probably the most competent member of the Great Lakes Avengers, Squirrel Girl actually has a decent chance to appear in some iteration in a future MCU project. At first glance, she seems like a pretty silly character sporting a big furry squirrel tail and ears, but she actually has a pretty decent power set on top of it, including super strength, night vision, a healing factor, and superhuman leaping. She's also adept with computers and communications, so even if we don't see her on the battlefield, it's possible she appears in the control room of some SHIELD operation at some point. I don't know, Squirrel Girl is a cult favorite, and out of all the weird characters on this list, she's probably one of the most respected out of all of them. At number 3 we have Howard the Duck. We all know that back in 2014, Marvel gifted viewers with one of the best memes of the year with a fake post-credit sequence suggesting that there'd be a Howard movie coming out in the MCU. Of course, this was just a poke at how silly the idea would be, and I agree. I just think that now, with all the fan service that has been done over the last few years, it's possible that we get to see this little dude again at some point. All joking aside though, Howard the Duck has appeared in so many Marvel events in the comics at one point or another that his wiki is actually up there with one of the longer reads out of any hero I've read. From the Fear Itself storyline to Original Sin, Marvel Comics often takes any interdimensional event as an excuse to bring back Howard for a laugh. So why wouldn't they continue to do so in the MCU? I bet the Guardians of the Galaxy post-credit scene wasn't the last we'll see of this very serious detective. And the 1986 feature film with a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes does not count. At number 2 we have Marrow. A former member of the X-Men, Marrow is another example of a sort of weird character that we can imagine being featured in one way or another in an upcoming MCU project. Definitely not in this phase, since they haven't yet included X-Men in their rollouts as of yet, but maybe in phase 5 they'll dig deep and feature some more niche X-Men like Marrow. Her powers are basically that she can grow her bones on command. Well, at first it isn't on command really, she is actually known at first to have very little control of her powers, leaving her overtaken by the extreme growth of bone matter from within her body, which is sort of gross and terrifying, but perhaps that could be used in a cool way for the MCU. Maybe Marrow is facing challenges controlling her powers throughout one of the movies, and only when Professor X helps her hone them does she come through as a Deus Ex Machina at the end of one of the movies. I don't know, something like that. She's not even that weird honestly, I just genuinely think I'd like to see her in an MCU project. At number 1 we have the one and only, my all-time favorite, 3D Man. If you've watched my other Weird Heroes lists, you'll know by now that I am a huge fan of 3D Man. Is that ironic? Is it a serious claim? You can't tell. Well, honestly, it's a bit of both. Primarily, I just love the idea of a hero that's 3D themed with absolutely no relationship to anything 3D whatsoever. Something about the character being stuck in the early 2000s when 3D had hit another golden age, sporting a green and red suit and the whole thing, something about that just makes me laugh. So that's the ironic side, but honestly, I think this character could be explored further. Delroy Garrett Jr. grew up as a track and field star, competing in the Olympics and the whole 9 yards, no pun intended. But I feel like there hasn't been a hero that's, before anything else, an athlete. Unless you count Spider-Girl. I guess Spider-Girl was an athlete in school, but she hasn't been in the MCU. But I just feel like this could be a cool opportunity for Marvel to offer more representation to the athletics community. That, and how 3D Man's whole vibe is lost in time, and it would be so cool and maybe a bit refreshing to revisit that retro early 2000s era at some point on the big or small screen. Alright, that was the list today. I hope you enjoy the weird superheroes lists. I have a heck of a fun time making them. Leave a comment if you have a weird superhero you'd like to see in the MCU, and I'll do my best to answer you. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I've been your host, Ben Ball. You know the rest. Catch you on the flip side.